Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at the most exciting parts from the Speed Chess Championship final between world champion Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. I'm only going to be looking at the 5+1 portion of the match today. This was an insane finale to the Speed Chess Championship, so I hope you guys enjoy this video. So in game 1, Hikaru had the white pieces and Magnus had the black pieces, and Magnus opted for a martial attack. So in this position, he played the move f5. Basically, f5 attacks this knight, and right now the knight currently can't move because of rook takes e1 being a threat. So Hikaru had to find a creative way to get out of this, and he found bishop f4. After bishop f4, black played bishop takes f4, g takes f4, and here's the problem with taking on e4, is that if you take, white will recapture with the d-pawn and exploit the pin on black's own knight. But Magnus found a shocking move after f takes e4, d takes e4. He played the move bishop f3 check, just putting the bishop on a square where it can be captured. And Hikaru took him up on that offer, so he played king takes f3, rook takes f4 was played, king g3, rook takes e4, rook takes e4, and rook takes e4. Now, this position looks pretty equal. It seems like material is pretty balanced, and there's not really much that either side can do to make tremendous progress. However, there was one moment when Hikaru could have potentially gotten an advantage and tried to win this game because Magnus actually blundered later in this game. Here, white played the move rook c1. There were just some normal moves played. King f8, c4, knight e7. Just some maneuvering, rook h4, trading the pawns. Rook d1, knight f5, bishop c2, knight d4 check, king g3, and g5. And here white played rook d2 and Magnus played the move king e7, which was a blunder because here white can play bishop takes h7. Hikaru unfortunately did not find this move, but the point of bishop takes h7 is that first, black cannot take this bishop and win a free piece because rook takes d4 will be the response, leaving white up a pawn, and there's no way that black can check the king or attack the rook in order to win the free piece. So knight f5, knight b3, knight e2, none of these really work as some in-between move. So here the best that black can do is either take the bishop and be down a pawn, or just keep playing the position normally, and that will be down a pawn as well. So this would have been a good try for Hikaru to get an advantage in this position. Unfortunately, he didn't find it, and he played the move f3 instead. And after knight takes c2, rook takes c2, king d6 was played, and they simply repeated moves in this position. After another draw in game 2, Hikaru drew first blood in game 3 with a win over Magnus. In this position, he played the move knight c5 check, forcing Magnus's king to go to f7. After king f7 was played, Hikaru played knight c4, which actually wins a pawn by force. So basically, black has a few options here. The first option is to take on c4, which is what happened in the game. So if knight takes c4 is played, b takes c4, note that there are no ways to defend the b7 or a6 pawn because with any move, white's going to play knight takes b7 except for the move b6, which will be met with knight takes a6. And basically, if I look at the other alternatives here, after knight c4, if black defends the knight with something like bishop c7, knight takes d6, bishop takes d6, and knight takes b7 will still be winning a pawn for white, and there's really no way to avoid this. Black can try moving the knight with something like knight c8, but the b7 pawn will still fall. And this is basically due to the fact that there is just no way for black to defend it. There's no light squared bishop and the king's too far away. So after knight c4, black had a choice to make. Magnus chose to take on c4, b takes c4 was played, and after b takes c4, black played king e7, giving up the pawn. So knight takes b7 was played by Hikaru, bishop b6. So I guess trying to trap this knight on the queen side. However, there's a way to get out of this pretty nicely. After c5 was played, bishop c7, c6. Note that black really can't approach the c6 pawn or the knight in any logical way because the d8, d7, d6, and d5 squares are covered by the e-pawn, c-pawn, and the knight. So they do a good job of boxing the king in. And after a few moves, bishop b6, f3, king e6, king f1, Magnus actually lost on time here. Now, it should be noted that this position is extremely hard to defend because there's simply no way for black to approach this pawn on c6, even trying to make a break in this position with f5, trying to undermine this position. Really, it's going to be pretty simple for white to win this because they're simply going to approach the queen side with their king, maneuver their pieces around, and use their extra pawn advantage to convert this game. Game 4 resulted in another draw. However, in game 5, Hikaru struck again. After getting this position out of the opening, Magnus played the move a3. Hikaru responded with the very nice move knight g5, which attacks the h7 pawn and threatens to completely destroy the king side, and it also opens up an attack on the b7 bishop. So Magnus played the only logical move here, which would be queen takes g5, defending against the h7 threat, and white took on b7, rook b8 was played, and rook takes c7. And after this, black took on b2, queen takes b2 was played, knight c5, and rook takes d6. And a few more moves were played. Basically, it's a bit tricky because of this pin on b7, but after more moves were played, it was clear that Hikaru had an advantage here with 2 extra pawns, especially this outside a pawn, which seems ready to just roll down the board and try and make a queen. And after a few more moves, g6, rook b6, queen a5, rook b5, queen a7, a4, Hikaru starts to march this pawn down, and pretty soon he converted his advantage quite nicely. So just some more moves. bc8, they traded rooks, rook b4, h5, h4, queen a5, king g2, rook d8. Some normal moves. Hikaru is getting ready to try and remove some of the defenders of the a-file and queen side so that he can march his pawn down. Queen a6, queen b5. Magnus refuses the trade. a5, queen a3, bishop d5. And here Magnus throws in the towel and resigns because there's simply no way to stop Hikaru from simply advancing his a pawn or just taking the knight and destroying the king side later on. There's simply no counterplay because white has the advantage with both the extra 2 pawns and the superior minor piece. So Magnus decided to resign, and Hikaru extended his lead to 2 points. After a drawn Game 6, Hikaru extended his lead even further in Game 7 with his 3rd win in the match. In this position, he played the move e5, which attacks this knight on d6. Magnus responded with the move rook b5, attacking the queen on c5. And here, white played knight f6 check. Magnus responded with king g7, and white was able to just take on d6 with the queen. And after queen takes d6, rook takes d6, Hikaru was just up a piece, and he was able to convert his advantage quite nicely and win in just a few moves. I should note that after the move knight f6 check, Magnus could have played the move queen takes f6, and here Hikaru should have been careful not to take on f6 with a pawn, because after rook takes c5, rook takes d6, it's roughly equal, and actually black might be very slightly better. However, after queen takes f6, white has the move queen takes b5, allowing their own queen to be taken, because after knight takes b5, white can play e takes f6 and be up in exchange and be winning. Or if the black queen moves somewhere, then you can just take the knight on d6 and be up a rook, and this would be even better for white. So after knight f6 check, black was basically forced to go down a piece, and queen takes d6, rook takes d6, and white was able to win shortly. In the 8th game of the 5+1 portion, the 2 super GMs reached this position after a relatively normal Catalan opening. Here, white has some slight pressure on the b6 pawn with the 2 rooks, and black has some pressure on the e4 pawn, but white has a pretty nice center, so I thought Magnus was a little bit better in this position. Here, Hikaru played the move queen b7, so putting more pressure on the e4 pawn, saying, hey, if you take on b6, I'll take on e4, and that'll be a better pawn for me to win. So Magnus played the move d5 to try and blunt this queen from this diagonal. And after e takes d5 was played, Magnus took the pawn on b6, queen a8, and he played e5. Hikaru played knight e4, rook a6, attacking the queen and this a5 pawn, queen c8, rook b6, so getting the rooks on the same rank, so like rook c6 could be bothersome in the future. Knight c5 was played, attacking the a6 rook. After rook takes a5, it seems like Magnus would be doing well because he's up 1 pawn, which is a protected pass pawn on the queen side at the moment. And basically his pieces are pretty active, and it seems like Magnus is doing well. However, Hikaru has a pretty useful resource in this position, which is the fact that he has this d pawn, which can just move down the board because it is supported by such well-placed pieces, right? The 2 rooks behind it, as well as the knight that are covering some of the key squares in front of the pawn, do a great job at ushering this pawn down and not only threatening to promote this pawn, but creating chaos in white's position. So here Hikaru played the move d4, queen c4 was played, attacking this c5 knight and trying to distract black from simply marching his pawn down the board. Rook c7 defends the knight and also opens up potential discovered attacks on this queen. After rook c7, white played queen b4, knight d3 was played, and here Magnus played the shocking blunder queen b5. What Magnus should have done is play the move Queen d2, which both attacks this knight and keeps an eye on some of the critical squares around his king and his center, because after Queen b5, it seems like this move is simply too ambitious. Like, Queen b5 puts the queen on a square where, yeah, it can maybe help usher the a-pawn down the board later on, but it really neglects his own king's safety or lack of safety at the moment, because here black played the move knight f4 check, and this simply wins the game on the spot. White's getting checkmated. After knight f4, first, white can't take it because then queen g4 is a huge problem. So if king h1, black can just play rook c1 check, and then you're just getting mated because the knight will be captured wherever it goes, and you can only play like queen f1 to stop it. And if king f1, you just take the knight, and rook c1, d3, queen h1, these are all huge threats that really can't be stopped, and white's getting crushed in this position as well. And any other alternative moves just lose. If king g1, rook c1 comes down. If king f1, then queen h3 or rook c1 just come down as well. In the game, Magnus played the move king h1, which was the best try, but after queen h3, he resigned because there was simply no way to stop a mate or losing a ton of material. So, for example, if white plays something like knight e1, then rook c1 will just be played. And then you're going to attack this knight on e1, and you're also going to threaten mate on g2 now because it's pinned. And there's simply no way to stop it. Something like g takes f4 will just be met with rook takes e1. And there's really no other moves. I can't see any other tries. So in this position, Magnus resigned, and Hikaru went up with a 4-point lead in the match. And at this point in the match, a lot of the viewers, myself included, were starting to see that Hikaru was just really showing some amazing chess. He hadn't lost a game yet, and although Magnus definitely seemed like he wasn't in form, Hikaru was just playing brilliantly. Like I said, he was undefeated thus far in this entire 5+1 portion, and despite being an underdog in the initial match predictions, Hikaru was showing that he was just crushing Magnus in a lot of these games and getting a massive lead in the match. Well, that's it for the 5+1 portion of the match. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.